Okay, good morning, everybody. It's actually wonderful to see a good group in person and a beautiful group here on Zoom. A testament to our subject, to Henrietta Szold, uh, who I've just been blown away the more I've had a chance to read and learn about her contributions to American and pre-state Israel Jewish life, all of which continues to resonate and echo until today. Um, I'm sure that many of you are also brought by the incredibly exciting opportunity that we have, and I want to thank Judy Rosenblatt, who's on, for this connection, to be joined around 10:30 by Francine Klagsbrunn, an outstanding author and leader in her own right, who wrote a recent, very, very recent, amazing biography of Henrietta Szold. She's going to join us for the second half. And I have prepared some questions with her to ask her so that she can reflect on what she sees as Szold's greatest achievements and contributions to American and Israeli Jewish society and her legacy for us today. One of the challenges in preparing this class is that this is a series on modern Jewish thought. And if I were to describe Henrietta Szold in a word, I would use the word action as opposed to the word thought primarily. The organizational leadership and actual practical life-changing contributions that she made in American society, in particular through the night schools that she created, and in Israeli society through the work of Hadassah and her work beyond Hadassah in developing and reforming the medical system, the educational system, in her work in the youth aliyah, saving many, many lives. All of that was a result of the incredibly devoted hard work that she put in and day out. She slept very few hours a night, and was just a tireless worker and organizer. So in many ways, it's hard to categorize her as a thinker. And it's actually not so easy to access her writings and speeches. Most of them are in archives. You have to have a little bit more of a scholarly bent and library access than I have at my fingertips to read a lot of her thought in its original form. But we're blessed with great researchers and writers like Francine Klagsbrunn and others who have collected a lot of her work and distilled it so that while it's not so easy to read her speeches and her essays and articles in full form, we can get access to them through her biographers. And why I feel that in particular, she's not just a Jewish actor in the sense of a person who did incredible action in her life, but a thinker, is because we do see in her speeches and in her writings her view and vision of Zionism, of the relationship between the diaspora and Israel, of a Jewish philosophy, which, in the tradition, I want to say, of modern Orthodoxy as well, but maybe most explicitly of the conservative movement, is really about blending tradition and integrity and authenticity to Jewish tradition with development and change and adaptation to the philosophies and wisdoms of the world around us in modernity. Those are hallmarks of her own thought, and her life was really a synthesizing, in the way she understood herself as a woman leader, and her role in Judaism as a woman, and in her the visions that drove her work, which I want to say one of the outstanding things I think in her work. This is kind of my pre-summary, and we're going to look at a few excerpts and a short biographical sketch. I'll attempt to do that before 10:30. One of the things that characterizes all of her work is a real, not just a blend between tradition and modernity, but a blend between particularism and universalism, a deep, deep commitment, first and foremost, to the Jewish people that drove her work. But whenever she built and founded an institution, it was immediately apparent that there were needs that she saw in the Jewish community that went far beyond the Jewish community, and she served, blindly, if that's, with a blindness to background, anyone who fit into the categories of need that she saw. So the night schools were founded in particularly because she saw a need amongst Russian Jewish immigrants in Baltimore to gain acculturation, to learn English, to gain civic knowledge. But when those schools were open, they were not open only to Jews, but to all immigrants, and served an incredible need. And really founded the model for those kinds of schools until today. We certainly can think about immigrants of all backgrounds over the last 100 years that have gained those kinds of English language, job readiness, acculturation, civic education skills through institutions like that. Really, the visionary founding of that came from Henrietta Szold. And the same goes for Hadassah's work in Israel and her work beyond Hadassah in Israel. She went to visit the Yishuv in 1909, and she saw the extreme poverty and lack of access to medical care for the indigenous and indigent Jews of the Yishuv. But she did not limit her services. Once she started to build up medical organizations and infrastructure, she did not limit her services only to the Jewish population of Palestine, but to all the people that were living there, and served all of their needs. And so to me, these are sort of the two hallmarks of her Jewish thought, which is, you send these packets down, the hallmarks of her Jewish thought, which were the blend of tradition and modernity, and the blend of particularism and universalism. Hopefully, we're going to see a few such glimpses in a couple of the excerpts that we're going to look at over the next 20 minutes. I want to begin just by skimming a kind of a short biography. The biography really is an attempt to distill even more briefly the biographical sketches that one can find online, whether from Wikipedia or the Jewish Women's Archive, or through some of the book reviews of the books that have been written that themselves summarize her life. And we're going to look at that. So for those who have the packet, it's the front page of the packet. For those here on Zoom, it is in the source sheet, which is now here. And I'm going to take a moment and attempt to see if this will work, paste into the chat as well the link to this source sheet in case you want to open it up on your own device. It's going to take me a moment. Okay, hopefully that link should open up for those online who want to look on the source sheet on your own time. And hopefully we'll email it out together with a recording of the class as well. So Henrietta Szold, I called this class Visionary of Diaspora and Israeli Jewish Life. She was born on December 21st, 1860 in Baltimore. By the way, I think both for the Rosenblatts and for the Exlers, this is a special point of connection with Henrietta Szold, her Baltimore roots and her leadership in Baltimore. One can take through the Jewish Museum of Maryland an audio tour, and you actually don't even need to get in your car. It's available online. You can sort of zoom in on Google Maps to each of the locations and hear the little audio clips and kind of take a tour of the important sites in Baltimore that were influential in Szold's life. She was the oldest of 8 sisters, and actually she was born in 1860, a year after her family had emigrated to America in 1859. Daughter of a congregational rabbi. This phrase is actually one of the most important descriptions of her life. She was an incredibly devoted eldest daughter, and studied at home with her father, Rabbi Benjamin Szold, the rabbi of Oheb Shalom in Baltimore. Studied multiple languages. He was an incredibly educated, scholarly rabbi, and she studied Torah with him. She studied multiple languages, and their relationship was one of the kind of through lines that really shaped every stage of her life. From graduating high school, Western High School, where she had the highest recorded GPA ever at the time. I don't know if it's been bested since or not, but graduating around 1877, she began her young adult life, in Baltimore, with some trips to Philadelphia through her work with the Jewish Publication Society as well. And over these years, first she was a teacher. She taught many subjects in a local school, She taught in the Hebrew school where her father was a rabbi. She taught adult education classes in Bible and other Jewish subjects, and she attended her own lectures and classes locally. And as early as 1877, she became the Baltimore correspondent for a New York publication called the New York Jewish Messenger. She wrote under the pen name Shulamit, sometimes appeared Sulamit, and wrote all kinds of articles, including, just this is a fascinating aside of American Jewish history, she was present at the event known as the Treifa Banquet, which was you can Google it and read about it, an event in Cincinnati, which was sort of a watershed moment for the question of the divergence of movements and whether commitment to kashrut would be followed through in different communities. And she was one of the first people to write about the food that was served there and the reaction of all of the people in attendance. So there's a little bit of like a Forrest Gump dimension here in terms of being a person who was present at all these key moments. I mean, she was born, at the end, really during the Civil War, and lived until the Second World War. And in that period of American and early Zionist history, she was kind of a feature of really every aspect. She, together with her father, opened the first evening school in the United States, as far as it has been researched to date, to teach English and American history to immigrants. If you turn to page 2, you can see a short excerpt from the Baltimore Sun, our paper of record for us Baltimoreans, from July 13th, 1892, an article quoting her describing these schools. She writes, or the article quotes her as saying, "In the Russian night schools, the chief aim pursued is the teaching of the English language, and the chief subject dwelt upon is United States history and geography. An appreciable percentage of those who frequent the night schools are cultured, intelligent men and women, abreast of the times, speaking and reading several foreign languages and versed in history and literature. A tuition fee of 30 cents per month was exacted from them who were known to be able to pay. 30 pupils presented themselves in the first evening. The number rose to 60 before the week was over, and at the end of the season, 150 had enrolled. During the second season, 500 were under instruction, and during the one just ended, this is, it's summer, this is, July, where this is written, summer of 1892, so at the end of that season, 708 men and women were taught in 7 English classes, 2 arithmetic classes, and 1 bookkeeping class. The pupils range in age from 9 to 60. But only such children are accepted as pupils as are put to earning a livelihood in the factories and cannot therefore go to the public schools. It has happened again and again that children and father, sometimes husband and wife, have sat on the same bench side by side." So you have a sense of the immediate and incredible success of this and the kind of organizational gifts that would be required to maintain this. The fact it's both its sensitivity, obviously, to people's limited means, its openness to people of all backgrounds, and the acuity with which she sees the people. She doesn't see immigrants, in their limitations as being newcomers to a land, as ill-educated or anything like that. She sees their tremendous capabilities and wants to help educate them to be ready to meet the challenges of immigrants and to thrive in the country that they have come to. So just, an amazing glimpse into this early contribution. I'm going to just take a moment's aside to say I'm not going to dwell in the time that we have on her personal life, which is, of course, its own incredibly fascinating chapters. The fact that she never married, the relationships that she did have, the painful non-romance with Professor Louis Ginsburg, and the impact that his non-pursuit of their potential romance had on the rest of her life, her close relationship with some and less close with her sisters, and the impact that had on her life. These are all things which are incredibly important, and her biographers do a beautiful job of weaving in to understanding the greater picture of who she was. But we're not going to dwell on that. I'm leaving that on the side for now. But I wanted to, of course, make note of it. And then even in these early years in Baltimore, she starts her incredible work in education and Jewish culture. She was invited, and you see a little asterisk there. The asterisk takes you down to the bottom of the page where I note only woman. There are a whole bunch of asterisks on this biography because there are many institutions that she joins the leadership of, in which she is the only woman. I'm just going to paste again into the chat the link to the source sheet for those who might have just joined. And I'm sorry I'm not getting to attend to other notes coming into the chat yet. I'll try to pause at some point to take a look at them. Okay, so yes, so she was invited to be on the publications committee of the New Jewish Publication Society, the JPS, which of course is known to all of us as an incredibly important contributor to Jewish learning, education, and culture through its book projects. And she took many, many important roles there over the next 20 years, editing and translating many works. She was shepherded for many years the American Jewish Yearbook, although she was only first credited in one of the American Jewish Yearbooks in 1904. Despite having played an active role, this is, of course, another sub-story of her life, the many things she contributed to without even acknowledgement. And over the years, and research, we come to understand her contribution even more greatly because of the androcentrism that permeates our world. Her contributions were not always recognized in real time. And it was during her tenure at JPS, of the JPS Bible, which now has gone through multiple rounds of newer translations and is the text that we so often study from and use its English translation, that project was begun and completed. And of course, she begins her Zionist leadership already then as a young woman, a charter member of the Baltimore Chevras Tzion. And in January 1896, she delivers a lecture called A Century of Jewish Thought at the Baltimore chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women. This is, you find in all of her biographies because it was a month before Herzl publishes his major work and a year before the first Zionist Congress. And in this lecture, A Century of Jewish Thought, she really distills a vision of Jewish thought that kind of culminates in a Zionist vision. So we're going to turn now again to page 2 of the source sheet. I'll just note here, kind of by way of her at least here, an appreciated contribution. This is just one. You can find scores of these in the many books that she translated for JPS and beyond. But for me, as a student of Talmud, this was amazing to discover. This is the preface to the Jastrow Dictionary. You can't, become a student of rabbinic literature and study texts in their original Aramaic without growing up with the Jastrow Dictionary. In fact, in yeshiva, everybody has their name for when you look up a word in Jastrow, and you find that in the examples or instances of the word, Jastrow has quoted the particular passage of Talmud that had the word in it that made you look it up. That's called a Jastrow jackpot. So, the Jastrow Dictionary is indispensable resource. The Jastrows and the Szolds were family friends and became mechutanim. One of the Jastrow's children married one of Henrietta Szold's sisters, Rachel, I believe. And so she was already, a known young scholar to Marcus Jastrow. And as you see in his preface, he expresses his gratitude to the friends who've assisted him in the arduous task of proofreading. I'm sure she did more than just proofread, among whom special mention is due to Miss Henrietta Szold of Baltimore. So we see that there. And now we're going to, come to what I just referenced, the Century of Jewish Thought. And this is an excerpt from Francine Klagsbrun's book, in which she talks about this talk. So I will read for you here. She called the Baltimore chapter talk, the first in the group. This is source 3. A Century of Jewish Thought. In it, she traced what she regarded as stages of Jewish thought over the past 100 years. They began with self-respect, introduced through the enlightened teachings of the German Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, moved on to self-knowledge, gained from such scholars as Leopold Zunz, delving deep into Jewish history. This was a school that she was very familiar with. Her father was educated at the Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau. So this, positive historical school of Jewish study was very familiar to her. And culminated in self-emancipation, which referred to the Zionist ideal of her day. That ideal pictured Jews living freely according to Jewish belief and ethics in their historic homeland, with the Hebrew language at the center of their activities. Hebrew, and by the way, her attention to language and the importance of language we'll circle back to a little bit later. Hebrew, first emphasized by Mendelssohn and his circle, made up an essential component of Zionism, she maintained, for it provided the key, not only to traditional Jewish texts, but also to the vast literary storehouse that represented the treasures of the Jewish people. So again, you see here, I wouldn't call it per se a religious Zionism, but it was a Zionism which understood the importance of religious understanding and knowledge to a full access to the Jewish culture that would be central to creating a vibrant Jewish life in Palestine. But her brand of Zionism differed from Herzl's. Whereas he strove for a political state as a haven for the persecuted Jewish people, she spoke of the spiritual renewal of the Jewish nation on the soil of their ancestral lands. Her approach has been compared to that of Achad Ha'am, pen name for the Hebrew essayist Asher Ginsburg, whose writings she had translated and greatly admired. Achad Ha'am disagreed strongly with Herzl's political goals, preaching a form of Zionism in which the land of Israel would serve as a center for the revival of a Jewish national culture. But Szold's insistence on the importance of maintaining traditional religious practices diverged from Achad Ha'am's secularism. She also pictured broad Jewish settlement in Palestine, not limited to an elite community that would establish a cultural center. Szold's ideas about Zionism would be expanded and refined in the years ahead as she became ever more involved with life in Palestine. At their core, however, would remain the ideal she shared with the Russian intellectuals who occupied so much of her thoughts and feelings during this period. Those are the immigrants to Baltimore that she knew. Judaism is more than a religion. It represents a complete system of living that could have its greatest fulfillment in the land of Israel. So to me, it's fascinating that a lecture called A Century of Jewish Thought is a lecture that ultimately is about Zionism. It helps you understand that she came to view Jewish text and ideas as ultimately a kind of convergence that leads up to a vision of our, settlement and renaissance in the land of Israel. So this was an incredibly important essay. Again, we have just kind of excerpts and analysis of it from Francine Klagsbrunn. Okay, great. Let's go on. So this was kind of her early years in Baltimore. In 1902, her father dies, and she moves with her mother to New York. And her initial goal, you can see how impactful her father is on her life, is to kind of organize and study his papers. And she feels that the best place to do that is at JTS. She becomes a student there. We have the exchange of letters where it becomes clear that she must make a commitment that she will not matriculate as a rabbinical student, but she's allowed to be sort of a student of special status there. Again, just, awareness of the times and of the moment. I will ask, by the way, if Francine Klagsbrunn comes on, for someone to just unmute themselves and let me know, because I might not catch it when she arrives. And I think there are actually fascinating parallels 70 years later between Henrietta Szold's life and Francine's life. Francine was one of the people that was part of the JTS committee that was established to study and analyze the question of women's ordination. So the idea that Francine Klagsbrunn, who studies someone who was there at JTS, could completely have become an incredibly successful rabbi, but wasn't allowed to, then, her biographer is someone who played an important role in the beginning of women's ordination at the Jewish Theological Seminary. So just amazing connections here. Okay, so she moves to New York, and from 1902 to 1920 is primarily based in New York. I see a hand, Seth. Go ahead, unmute if you want, and a quick comment.
I think Francine is here.
Oh, wonderful. Let me see. Yes. Okay, great. Welcome, Francine. We're so thrilled that you're here. And I just commented on the extraordinary sort of connection that I see between you and Henrietta Szold, and just pointed out the powerful and beautiful irony of her having matriculated at JTS as, a student who could not be a rabbinical student, and your role on the committee that, studied and ultimately, paved the way for women's ordination and matriculation as students at rabbinical students at JTS. So we're so glad that you're here. If you want to unmute and say hello, so we know you hear us and we hear you. Maybe not yet. Okay, we're going to go on a little further and hope that we hear and see Francine shortly. I'm going to take 2 or 3 more minutes to look at 1 or 2 more texts, and then hopefully we'll begin this second half of our program together with her. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so New York. She moves upon her father's death and studies at JTS. Certainly the landmark moment in her life in many ways is her 1909 trip with her mother to Palestine. This was not, a posh, not, I don't know if anything was posh in 1909, but this was not a visit just to the high culture places, but it was truly a glimpse of what was really happening all around, seeing the agricultural and economic distress of all the residents. This really, shaped the direction of her life. In 1912, she forms, just before Purim, the Daughters of Zion Hadassah chapter, and the Encyclopedia of Jewish Women describes it in this way. Szold envisioned an independent social service organization, a group guided by the principles of American progressivism, project orientation, trained and willing forces, and a tested organization. It was to be altogether different from the predominantly male Zionist societies, such as the Federation of American Zionists. Those societies, were romantic and amateurish, not scientific and businesslike. Under her direction, Hadassah became the largest and most powerful Zionist group in the United States. So this was her period primarily in New York. This doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. Remember, of course, she was continuing with all of her work with Jewish Publication Society, and the many other things that were occupying her time. And just will come now to the third chapter of her life, by geographic locations, which was the time that she spent living in Palestine, although she made numerous extended trips back to New York to serve, as president of Hadassah back in New York for a few years during this period. But from 1920 to 1945, she's living in Palestine. She expands Hadassah's work with all of its focus on medical and educational development and reform. She became elected in 1927, one of the 3 member executives of the World Zionist Organization, primarily focused on the portfolios of health and education, really her kind of pet projects, so to speak, although they were so much more than that. Really, the third area that she was focused was social welfare, soup kitchens, and all kinds of other things to provide social workers for the needy. And this kind of parlayed its way into her role as the director of Youth Aliyah, in which she saved many, many lives. And, again, as we said, we're not going to focus on her personal life, but obviously had a motherhood-esque experience that she did not have with her own direct children, because she did not have her own children, but she had many, many thousands of children as she ensured the placement and thriving and well-being of the many, many children that she connected to as director of the Youth Aliyah. I'll take a few moments now just to comment on kind of her political outlook, which was complex, but she was active in Brit Shalom and Ichud, 2 political groups that in their time were Zionist groups envisioning a binational state. And we can get a little glimpse of this from the Hadassah newsletter in December 1929. So this is when she has just come back to New York after a few years in Israel. This is a conference that kind of is her first major public appearance since returning from Palestine. And she's greeted with, incredible applause and ovations and accolades. And she speaks to the conference. And we're going to read from this newsletter in December 1929. This is right after kind of the next huge step in the founding of the Jewish Agency, and also, the pogroms, riots of 1929 that deeply impacted the Jewish population in Palestine. So here is what the Hadassah newsletter writes about her speech and role in the convention that year. The convention, which was attended by the 272 delegates, was formally called to order by Mrs. Szold. In her opening address, she spoke on the 2 outstanding Zionist events of the year, the consummation of the Jewish Agency and the recent troubles in Palestine. Of course, I can't not read this against the backdrop of our moment today, and the relationship between diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews in times of crisis. And she says, "The riots have grieved us immeasurably. They have turned the hearts of all Jewry to Palestine. They have opened the purses of all Jews in the diaspora. And so far as money can relieve the distress of the Yishuv, those distresses will be relieved. However, to us in America, to Hadassah, these riots have served to make us rededicate ourselves anew to the ideal of the Jewish national home. They have made us realize that now more than ever must our work for this ultimate goal be prosecuted with the utmost vigor. They have made us know that we must support the Yishuv in all its undertakings. The other outstanding Zionist event, the realization of the Jewish Agency for Palestine, has for us serious and valuable implications. We cannot fail to be gratified that we have a united Jewry working for Palestine. But we, to whom Palestine has meant life, we who consider the Jewish national home to be the focus around which Jewish life everywhere must center and on which the future of Jewry depends, must now as never before bring home to ourselves and our new partners in the preeminence which Palestine must play in the development of Judaism and Jewish life everywhere. Then that was her opening comments, and then we have kind of her keynote address. After reviewing the outstanding events, this is the second column now, just three lines down, in Palestine and in Zionist effort for the past 2 years, Ms. Szold came to the question of Arab-Jewish relations. Referring to the recent outbreaks and their effects, she said that Palestine Jewry meets the trouble with a determined front, and it means to persist, not to budge. Can we in the diaspora do less, Ms. Szold asked? What has happened in Palestine has doubled and trebled the aspects of our undertaking. Let us suppose that political clearness and advantage will arise from the horror and anguish we have lived through. Is there one of us who will be satisfied with that result alone? Can one of us be at peace with himself so long as this appalling misunderstanding exists between us and our neighbors in Palestine? Are we content to be in Palestine at the point of a bayonet, whether this bayonet be carried by British soldier, Arab agitator, or the Jewish self-defense? Ms. Szold declared that the matter of Arab relations is the responsibility of the Jews, or at most the responsibility of Jews and Arabs. She urged a closer bond between Arab and Jew. She recommended the teaching of the Arabic language, literature, and history, right? So think back when she was talking about the importance of Hebrew language. Now she's talking about the importance of Arabic, an acquaintance with Arab customs and the Muslim religion as part of the Jewish cultural equipment. The Arab relations should be made part of every program of studies set up for our young people, Ms. Szold said. The completion of this work will be the reward after generations of effort as our whole Zionist undertaking reaches out into the distant future. They are both messianic tasks, as all peace and conciliation are. Ms. Szold declared that political action should be left to a few chosen leaders, but that all Zionists should work towards making effective the movement between the Zionist organization and the new partners of the Jewish Agency, and further the work of conciliation between Jew and Arab. A different time, for me, the dream remains, and the values that she speaks about are unchanged, even if they're incredibly challenging and many obstacles that stand in the way of them. Hold on one second, we're just going to close out, and then we'll see if we can bring Francine on for our conversation. So just share the very bottom of the biography. I thought this quote about her kind of evolution, and we already see it in this 1929 speech. This quote from the Encyclopedia of Jewish Women is beautiful. It talks about, she brought her progressive American vision to Palestine and always remained American in many ways. But as she spent more time in Palestine, she became the spokesperson of Palestine back to America. She was always a bridge, but the emphasis shifted. And the quote here is, from an apostle of Americanism in Palestine, she developed into an interpreter of the Yishuv to America. She strongly believed that one day Palestine, resplendent intellectually, would repay to the diaspora its whole investment in terms of spiritual succor, stimulation, and strength. And we'll note her passing at Hadassah Hospital on February 13th, 1945, literally in the institution that she built, and that her yahrzeit, the 30th of Shvat, as the day that was chosen in Israel to be Mother's Day. Now it's evolved into Yom Mishpacha. It's not Yom Ha'em anymore as our world continues to evolve, but it's a testament to the way in which she was Aim HaYishuv, really the mother of the entire Yishuv, and truly an unparalleled figure. So hopefully in this first part, we had a chance to see through her biography and some excerpts of her writing and studies of her speeches, these kinds of pairings of tradition and modernity, in Jewish identity, of universalism, of particularism and universalism, the idea that the needs she saw in the Jewish community, she then served both for the Jewish community and those beyond, and her vision of a Zionism that was about Jewish cultural thriving and the centrality of religion in Judaism, the entirety of Jewish peoplehood, and the need for Hebrew language, and then ultimately to build relationships with Arab neighbors. Okay, let's see. Is Francine here? Wonder if she's having difficulty unmuting. Francine, can you hear us?
Seth is helping Fran right now. Her new computer is not letting her in.
Okay. We could certainly have her call in. That would work fine. I can put a dial-in number into the chat. Hold on a moment. For those who may not know, she's a very, very young 93 years old, and an incredible career of her own, Francine. So let me see if I can put in a phone number to call.
And she's waiting for Barbara Streisand to produce the Golda movie starring Shira Haas as Golda.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, here's one phone number that Francine could use, 646-558-8656. And then she would just put in the meeting ID, which I'll tell you in a moment, is 470-341-910. That would be the meeting ID to type in if she's able to call in. And hopefully then we'll be able to hear her. Let's see. Okay, while we're waiting, happy to take a brief pause for questions or comments. Ruby, you want to say something?
Just briefly, my late father-in-law, Irving Isaac Langer, was born in 1902 in New York, the youngest of 6 children, a very religious family. His father, the original Richard Langer, decided that the United States was not religious enough for his family and shipped his wife and 5 of the 6 children to Palestine. And there they lived, I believe in Jerusalem, lived there until the outbreak of World War I, where the British made all American citizens leave the country. And so he actually came back to this country, got off the boat to his bar mitzvah. So had that not happened, he obviously would have remained in Palestine. And needless to say, I wouldn't be sitting here, but whatever.
Yes.
It's just an interesting tale and
Yes.
a very unusual story. People,
Yes.
when they hear that, to leave the United States and
Yes.
go to Palestine.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
the unusual story.
Beautiful. Another sign of the times and sign of individual personal strength. In fact,
Stephen,
yes.
sorry to interrupt.
No,
She's
no,
gonna call in, and if it doesn't work, she's gonna call me back. Okay?
Okay, great. She has both the phone number to call and the meeting
Yeah.
ID to put in.
Yes.
Great. Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you, Ruby, for that. Also, just mention in the Bait connections to Henrietta Szold, once I publicized this class, Helen Feit, a Bait member, sent a photo of her father, Eli Melech, and her uncle Dov with Henrietta Szold when they arrived at the Atlit detainee camp. They came with the Yaldei Tehran project that she was involved in, bringing over families from Siberia and all kinds of other places. And she tended so personally to their needs. I see my dad's hand up, but and others. Hold on one moment. I want to look at one more source in case Francine.
Could I just make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead. Who's that?
Teddy.
Patty, great. Go ahead.
So it's interesting how she wanted to create a relationship with the Arabs and Palestine and other people in order to create a connection and a joint understanding of each other's culture.
Yes.
And how she encouraged in her teachings in the school the learning of Arabic and that language, so to prevent all the chaos that's happening today.
Yes.
That she was a woman before her time in terms of, instead of hate, to have that understanding of each other's culture and language so we could better get along and survive in a peaceful way.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. As we're in case we have a limited time, once Francine gets on, I want to give her the most time I can. I'm just going to share this last excerpt, which is on the bottom of page 4 on the packets. This is a letter that she wrote to Chaim Peretz about saying Kaddish after her mother died. She writes, "It is impossible for me to find words in which to tell you how deeply I was touched by your offer to act as Kaddish for my dear mother." Now, because, things to understand here in the context, the old firstborn male child was often called the Kaddish because that was the person who was expected to take responsibility for saying
Sorry to
Kaddish.
interrupt again, Stephen, but
Oh.
her phone number is on here. It's muted. I don't know whether you can unmute it or
I may be able to. Hold on.
new number.
It's the 212 number.
Yeah.
I think, Francine, if you can hear me, I think you press *6 to unmute. Let's see if that'll work. I'm going to double check what it's been a while since I looked up that code. Hold on a second.
Just 6, no star needed.
Hold on. Thanks for bearing with us, everybody. We hope to make this work. Yeah, so I think, Francine, if you can hear me, I think if you press *6 on your phone, it will hopefully unmute you. I can't seem to do it for you, but Francine, if you hear me, if you can press *6 on your phone, that should hopefully unmute you. Not working yet. Just the star button and then 6. All right, we'll keep moving forward just a little bit. And again, Seth or anyone else, please feel free to interrupt me at any point to bring Francine on. We're going to go back to this Kaddish quote for a few moments. So the Kaddish, was often the responsibility of an oldest son, and so here. This is, in the absence of an oldest son, this friend, Chaim Peretz, is offering to Henrietta that he will say Kaddish for her mother as the Kaddish. And she writes, "I cannot even thank you. It is something that goes beyond thanks. It is beautiful what you have offered to do. I shall never forget it. You will wonder then that I cannot accept your offer. Perhaps it would be best for me not to try to explain to you in writing, but to wait until I see you to tell you why it is so. I know well and appreciate what you say about the Jewish custom, and Jewish custom is very dear and sacred to me. And yet I cannot ask you to say Kaddish after my mother. The Kaddish means to me that the survivor publicly and markedly manifests his wish and intention to assume the relation to the Jewish community which his parent had, and that so the chain of tradition remains unbroken from generation to generation, each adding its own link." By the way, that's a profound and beautiful insight about what the Kaddish is. It's saying, I come to the synagogue, I come to the community, and I utter a prayer in memory of my loved one. And that's the way that I say I'm following in their footsteps. By engaging in Jewish ritual and Jewish community, I am continuing their legacy. You can do that for the generations of your family. I must do that for the generations of my family, meaning I can't outsource that responsibility to anyone else. It wouldn't have the desired effect. I believe that the elimination of women from such duties was never intended by our law and custom. Women were freed from positive duties when they could not perform them. This is a colloquial way of talking about what we call in rabbinic literature mitzvot aseh shehazman grama, positive time-bound commandments that women were exempt from, right? So she's relating specifically to that. And, in just common English writing, she's alluding to a deep knowledge of Jewish text and law, but not when they could, right? So this is her belief. The idea is, but if you were not bound by other primary responsibilities, let's say, family or childcare responsibilities. That was her understanding. The rabbis provided this exemption because women were called to motherhood, and that could make demands of them at any moment. And so to, have specific time-specific positive commandments, they were exempt from. They couldn't be obligated because they had a superseding calling. But her take is that's, for those who had those duties, but if they didn't, then this exemption should not apply to them and they should
Ignore
be bound.
that. Okay, so, sorry, I have Henrietta, I'm sorry. I have Francine on my phone.
Great.
I don't know if people can hear her.
Can anybody hear me? I'm so sorry.
We hear you loud and clear. Okay, great.
If you, this has never happened before. I do Zoom meetings all the time. I don't know what happened.
No problem at all. No problem at all. We're delighted that you're here. I'm going to take a moment to introduce Francine and then ask her a few questions. So it's a huge thrill for us, and the turnout attests to the desire to get a chance to honor and learn from Francine Klagsbrunn, who is herself a writer and someone who's played an outsized role in women's leadership in the Jewish community, as I mentioned earlier, through her role on the commission that studied the issue of the Jewish Theological Seminary ordaining women as rabbis, as a leader at Women of the Wall, and in her work in all kinds of other important Jewish organizations, including the Jewish Publication Society of America, JPS. And so in so many ways, Francine, I see the spiritual connection and the values connection and the leadership connections between you and Henrietta Szold. And your very, very recent biography has opened up her life and her story in such an accessible and rich, richly sourced and studied way to so many more people through the Jewish Lives series of Yale University Press. What I was able to read on Google Books, I read voraciously, and I look forward to owning and reading the entire book myself. And he's just a beloved commentator and writer in the Jewish community and beyond. And it's a thrill and an honor to have you. To thank you for your all your decades of service.
I apologize for what happened. I'm about to cry because it's never happened to me before. But we'll do the best we can by phone.
No problem. I hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, great. So with thanks for all your leadership and with an eager audience, I want to ask you a few questions. We have had a chance to make our way through a kind of brief biography and highlights of Henrietta Sold's thought and her writing and her contributions to diaspora and pre-state Jewish life and beyond, and its echoes until today. And I want to ask you if you'll share with us, as you researched and learned about Henrietta Szold, what did you feel like were her most outstanding qualities of leadership and contributions to Jewish thought? And I particularly mention Jewish thought because that's the theme of our study. So what do you feel like were her most outstanding qualities of leadership and contributions to Jewish thought? We're all ears, Francine.
Okay. Well, I think leadership, as you know, she was the founder of Hadassah. She had a great ability to work very, very hard and to demonstrate to others what it meant to work hard and to be devoted to a cause. So she taught Hadassah women and then later people all sorts of things, but she herself was an example of the best of that kind of work, of dedication and caring. So I think that was one of her great qualities of leadership. The other was she was a terrific organizer. She was a genius at organizing. Things could be a total mess. She worked for a while for the Federation of American Zionists. She said it was like cleaning out the Aegean stables. It was such a mess. But she, in her super organized way, got it all in order. And people learned from that you can be organized. It's important to do that. But aside from all of that, she made an enormous contribution to Zionism. She was a devoted Zionist. She learned about Zionism from Russian immigrants who had come to Baltimore. And while the German Jews of that time rejected them, she accepted them, and they were very, to her point of view, very educated Jewishly. And she learned about Zionism, and she came to feel that, and this is, I think, the basis of her thinking, that she learned from her father that Judaism is not just a creed or religion, it's a way of life. And that to complete that way of life, you've got to have a homeland. And that Zionism was part and parcel of Judaism. You couldn't have one without the other. When she went to Palestine, it was called in those days, the first time, she came back and she said, without Zionism, there was nothing for the Jews. There was extinction, because she felt so strongly that there needed to be a land for the Jewish people, and they needed to live there. And so that was a very basic tenet of her belief, was Zionism. And she believed very strongly in this total view of Judaism, that it's a total way of life. She was an observant Jew, and lived that way herself, even though she was progressive in some ways. She started a synagogue when she lived in Palestine with her friends, a mixed women and men, which was certainly different than the Orthodox way. But she was observant and caring, and she became a symbol in her time of dedication, of caring about the Jewish people. And by the way, she also cared very deeply about the Jewish people getting along with each other. And there's and it's something that we need to think about very much today, right? Not fighting with each other. When she became known in East State Israel, she put out manifestos pleading with the people not to fight with each other, to create friendship and getting along, no internal terrorism. And so she cared very much about that. And on her deathbed, there's a lovely story, which I have at the very end of the book. On her deathbed, Chaim Weizmann, the Zionist leader, and Judah Magnus, who had been head of the Hebrew Union College, had disagreed, because Judah Magnus, like Henrietta Szold, believed at that point in a binational state. Things were different in those days, and they felt very strongly that there could be peace between the two peoples and they could live together. Chaim Weizmann was a total Zionist, didn't believe in, that. He was totally committed to the Jews living in the land of Israel. So they were fighting. They had been fighting, and they had not got along. They had not been speaking to each other. And on her deathbed, each of them came, not knowing the other was there, came to visit her. And she took each of their hands, she called them to her bedside, took each of their hands and held them. And she said, "You must promise to get along. This is very important for the Jewish people." And they did. And they got along. They stopped their fighting, and they got along after that. So I would say that is another one of her legacies, and one of the things that she taught us, which is, especially today, is we know how much internal fighting we have, that the Jews have to learn to get along with each other. That's a long answer to a short question.
That's an amazing answer. And actually, I want to read that paragraph from your book, because even as you tell it now, the way it's written is just extraordinary. So I'm just going to read it out loud for everyone to hear. This is from the very, very end, page 191. Chaim Weizmann arrived one day while Magnus was visiting. The two men had been at odds because of Magnus's commitment to Ichud, the political party, and pacifism, far removed from Weizmann's outlook. So Magnus waited at the doorway, allowing the other man to enter the room alone. When Szold saw Magnus, she had a nurse call him in, whereupon she took his hand. Weizmann took Zold's other hand, commenting on the fact that they were both holding her hand. It made her happy to see the two of them together, Szold told the men, and now they needed to put aside their differences. When the men left, they agreed that they must never quarrel in that way again. Szold, who had sought peace on many fronts, had cemented peace between two towering figures in the Zionist movement. I mean, it moves me almost to tears, and it just feels like a complete continuity of the legacy that we talk about in Pirkei Avot of Aharon HaKohen, of Aaron the priest, who was Ohev Shalom v'Rodef Shalom, loved peace and pursued peace, and the power that she had. I mean, any person lying in their hospital bed who might have had those two people visit might not have had the power to actually bring them together in the way that she did. It's truly an extraordinary story. Thank you so much for bringing it to light. Let me ask you, Francine, another question.
Sure.
Szold was so unique. She was so often the lone woman in male-dominated spaces and such a trailblazer. Can you reflect on what you feel were the influences that helped her become the person that she was? How did she become the incredibly powerful leader that she was?
Well, I would say that it began in childhood with her father. She was the eldest of 5 surviving daughters. There were 3 others who had died in infancy or child, or at birth. And but she was the eldest, and her father, who was a rabbi, treated her the way in those days a rabbi might have treated his eldest son, and not his daughter, but he had no sons. She sat at his foot at his knees, and she learned Chumash and Tanakh and Talmud and total everything in Jewish culture. And she learned also general culture. She learned to speak German and French and English very well. And so she gained a lot of confidence in that way, in her knowledge and in her view of herself in a scholarly way. And maybe that's part of her leadership also, one might say, because so she wasn't looking, to do the kind of, well, she wasn't looking to just live the kind of life everybody else lived. She really saw herself as an individual, and she was strong in that knowledge and that strength that her father gave her. His influence remained with her all her life. So she left her father's home already in a different way than many other women did. She didn't get married, although she would like to get married, but she didn't. That's a whole separate story we're not going to get into. Her thwarted love affair, her thwarted love, her rejected love, but she didn't get married, and so she went out there very knowledgeable. She became the first editor, they called her secretary in those days, but editor of the Jewish Publication Society. A woman, as you say, in a totally man's world. But she had enough confidence in her knowledge to be able to do that. When she went to the seminary, even though she wanted to study some more, she had knowledge. She felt when she first took her first course that she read to a friend, I could have taught that course because she was so knowledgeable. So I think that strength to make it in a man's world came from that kind of confidence, although on other levels she was not confident. She would question, she was a mixture. She would question her own abilities, and yet she was very strong about wanting things done in her way. On some levels she knew she was right. She knew the strength that she had, and yet in some levels she was not that confident about it. But I think that was it. And the other thing was, at that time, women like her, who were not married, who were pursuing careers, were very close friends. She created close friendships with other women, and I think those women's friendships really helped her to make it in that man's world. I think your time is up here, right?
So I think our group can stick around for about 5 more minutes if you have the time, Francine.
Sure, I do.
Okay, terrific. So let me ask you, you've touched on this a little bit, but I guess a closing or second to last question. What are the lessons that you feel that we as modern American Jews with a strong relationship to the modern state of Israel, lessons that we can learn from Henrietta Szold's life and legacy?
Well, I touched on it before. I think we can learn to be confident in our own beliefs in the state of Israel today, especially when Israel is being so criticized. I mentioned, as I said, when she was growing up, she was surrounded by what we call German Jews who had come from Germany, and they rejected the idea of a land, a homeland for the Jewish people, because they saw America as the new Zion, and they spoke about dual dual loyalty if Jews were loyal to another country. And she, on her father, but she also particularly rejected that. She said no. She accepted what the Russian Jews had said, and they had been rejected by the Germans. She accepted what the Russian Jews said, which was the importance of a land and a homeland for the Jewish people. And I think that determination lasted. She ended up living, even though she always spoke of herself as an American, and she missed her sisters, her 4 younger sisters, terribly. She ended up living in Palestine, Free State Israel, because it meant so much to her, and she had so much to contribute to it. So I think we as Jews should recognize that we have a lot to contribute also. And another part of that is, by the way, when she started Hadassah, she started, and she was determined that what needed to be done in the land of Israel for the Jewish people and for the Arabs as well was healthcare. That they needed healthcare, they needed hospitals. When she was there before that, she had seen such poverty and poorly run hospitals. So she really felt that was tremendously important. Well, some of the men's Zionist groups made fun of the women. They called this diaper Zionism. Zionism that was concerned with people's health, with women and children's health, with pregnant women. They laughed at that. To them, Zionism was building settlements, building up the land, which of course it is. But also, there was this other aspect of it. And she developed that aspect of it and kept to it, and it didn't matter what the other group said. So again, we have to recognize what we consider important in the land and in Israel today, and support it and support what they're doing and what we believe in, and not care and not get waylaid by criticisms and what others say. We know what we believe, and we have to stay with that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. What a wonderful, wonderful reflection. And I want, on behalf of everybody, just to thank you for your incredible research. You're an amazing writer, and every page and every paragraph tells a story in such a resonant and profound way. And this is a really important contribution. I want to share with the group that when Judy made the connection between me and Francine, and I, indicated this class, Francine wrote how appreciative she was because you feel that Henrietta Szold's story remains undertold. And I agree. And I think that so many of the pieces resonate just deeply personally for me with my own vision of Judaism and Zionism and intergroup relations and intra-group relations, the balances between tradition and modernity, the balances between particularism and universalism. And I think what's so powerful as well is, as you were alluding to at the end, the impact that leaders make, not just in thought vision, but truly in action. And without great organizers and people who know how to do the work and get the work done and cut through the bureaucracy and build effective bureaucracy, no visions can come to pass. So we need that partnership. And in so many ways, she actually embodied both dimensions of thought and action. Her legacy is amazing, and we're so grateful to you, Francine, for having brought it more to light and for taking the time to share with all of us. I want to thank you so much. And I know that everybody on the Zoom, you can't see it because you're on the phone, but there are 35 screens here on Zoom, and we have another handful of people here in person. And we're just so grateful. We wish you continued health and blessing for more projects to come.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I so apologize for that mess. I'm going to scream at a man in my building who sometimes helps me with my computer. That's what I'm going to do as soon as I hang up. See if he can straighten this out. I just don't know what happened, but I'm so
problem.
glad.
We all heard you. We heard you loud and clear. We're sorry we didn't get to see you, but we heard you loud and clear. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad. So good luck with the rest of your series. It sounds wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Take good care.
Okay.
For those who wish to stay around a few more minutes, we have an anecdote from one of our in-person folks. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to hang up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Yeah.
Seth, for making the connection.
Okay.
ahead.
So if I could just share
Okay.
an anecdote and amplify on Francine's point about Henrietta's concern, her devotion to healthcare in Israel and mandatory Palestine. So I live in Jerusalem, and one of my roles there is I'm the Israel chair of the International Committee for Har HaZeitim, the Mount of Olives. And Henrietta Szold is buried there. So I go to visit Henrietta Szold, Zikrona Livracha, about once every 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes more often than that. And I had the privilege to get to know somebody by the name of Abed. I still have, even though he passed away about 2.5 years ago, I still have his phone number in my phone. Because Abed, if when he passed away was a day under 160 years old, I would be shocked. Abed was a member of a family in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives who were grave diggers. And they got to know Henrietta Szold in a very, very intimate way. She made sure that they got the health care, the medical attention that they needed, and they became just incredibly devoted to Henrietta Szold and everything that she did. So that when she passed away in 1945, they became kind of like the caretakers of her grave. I take people over to that section. It's called Chalkat Kihilat Yerushalayim. It is beautiful. It is fenced off, and it is the exemplar for what a chalka, what a section should look like. And her grave is the shrubbery there is manicured because Abed became the caretaker there after 1967. Between 1948 and 1967, of course, he and his family couldn't tend to the cemetery. And in fact, when we came back in 1967, after 40,000 graves were desecrated, headstones turned into latrines and paving stones for the Jordanian Legion army base on the Mount of Olives. Abed, who must have had a photographic memory, I would sit and talk to him about this before he passed away all the time, pointed out that, no, that headstone that you're taking there does not belong over there at that grave. It belongs over there. And so he just was an amazing font of information, incredibly devoted to Henrietta Szold and everything that she did. I do have a relationship with Ibrahim, Abed's son, and Abed's grandson, who now takes care of the grave. His name is also Abed, but the original Abed was just a phenomenal personality, and really deserves to be remembered in his own right. Tremendously devoted to Henrietta Szold.
What a beautiful story, and it feels like it takes us back to the her letter about Kaddish, because it feels like this is a way of perpetuating her legacy and her memory by keeping connected with the people who, you know, who she took care of, who now take care of her, and you're a part of that chain. It's a beautiful thing. And in fact, this is another dimension of her work, which was she was, you know, active at such a high level of organization at such a large scale level, but she continued to try to take care of many, many individuals. She was really like a patron for individuals who were struggling in various ways, and she, you know, looked in on them personally. Truly, truly extraordinary. Dad, I'm gonna let you take the last word before we sign off.
Thank you. I just wanted to repeat something that you had said. I think it was at your last class. And since we have more people here, I thought I would repeat it, that you grew up and we still live several blocks away from Szold Drive. And on a corner house, there is a plaque or at least there was a plaque, attesting to Henrietta Szold and maybe also to her father. So next time we go for a walk, I will take a picture of that plaque if it's still there and forward it to you.
Thank
The
you.
other thing you mentioned about being disciples of Aaron, interestingly enough, Rabbi Benjamin Szold was the rabbi of Oheb Shalom.
Mm,
His dear friend, Rabbi Marcus Jastrow in Philadelphia, was a rabbi of Rodef Shalom.
beautiful, beautiful. Okay, we have may we continue in all of their legacies. So thank you to everybody for joining. So much fun and such a, you know, a wonderful dive into this incredible person and her legacy with so much to teach us today. Thank you again to Judy and Gary. Gary wrote a beautiful piece on the book as well. And thank you for making the connection. What a treat to have Francine. And we'll post the recording and the link to the source sheet, and encourage everybody to buy Francine's book. Devorah HaKohen also wrote an extraordinary biography. There's a lot of great stuff to read. So blessings to everybody. We've got 4 more weeks of great modern Jewish thinkers coming up, 2 with Rabbanit Bracha and 2 with Rabbi Sarah. So stay tuned. Same time each week, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Take good care all. Bye-bye.